Hello, everyone. Welcome to our bi-monthly Bridge Culture Club. Today we're discussing I Cheerfully Refuse, and today's event is hosted by Bridge, Michigan. And if you are not familiar with us or if this is your first Culture Club, so nice to meet you all. Thank you for joining. I'm Jackie Garrett. I'm a fund development specialist here. I work on our membership work. My colleague Sally's joining. She's hanging out in the chat with you all. Thank you all for joining us today. In case you aren't familiar with us, Bridge Michigan is Michigan's nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering issues that matter to you and your community. You can subscribe for free at bridgemi.com. And also, those of you who are current Bridge Club members, people who have donated to Bridge over the last year, any amount, you get a number of benefits, including access to a free electronic copy of each Bridge Culture Club selection. You can become a member today by visiting the link that we will drop into the chat in just a moment. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by Leif Enger. I will give a full introduction of him momentarily. We're incredibly honored that he was willing to join us for a discussion of his just amazing book. The schedule for today's discussion is this. I'll introduce Leif, and then we'll have a discussion about the book for about 40 minutes. And then for that last 15 or 20 minutes, we'll present any and all of the questions that people drop into the chat over the course of this conversation. So please, if you have a burning question for the author, just drop it into the Zoom chat and we will spend that last 15 or 20 minutes to make sure that we answer some of those. And then we'll conclude promptly at 1 p.m. We'll be recording this discussion and the recording will be on Bridge's website, www.bridgemi.com. And now, without further ado, I will introduce Leif Enger. Leif Enger grew up in Osakis, Minnesota, and worked as a reporter for the Minnesota Public Radio before writing his best-selling debut novel, Peace Like a River, which won the Book Sense Award for fiction and was named one of the year's best books by Time Magazine and the Los Angeles Times. His second novel, So Brave, Young, and Handsome, was also a national bestseller. It was a Midwest Booksellers Honor Book and won the High Plains Book Award for fiction. His third novel, Virgil Wander, was longlisted for the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and was named a Best Book of the Year by Amazon, Library Journal, Book Page, and Chicago Public Library. He lives with his wife in Duluth, Minnesota. So with that, I have given the introduction, and that means now we can begin this discussion. Thank you so much, Leif, for joining us. We are just so honored that you would, come in and speak with our group here. And so, before we dig into I Cheerfully Refuse, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you and your background. So let's talk about you. What's your story? Where are you from?
Sure.
Why'd you
Yeah.
write about the Great Lakes?
Minnesota lifer, I guess. I went to school here. I was born in Osakis, Minnesota. Grew up thinking I would probably go someplace exotic like Seattle or Madrid, maybe some little dark harbor above the Arctic Circle. But instead, I married a Twin Cities girl, and we've kind of stuck around. We live in Duluth now on a hillside above Lake Superior, and if you like wind and short days and October snow, and I like all those things, then Duluth is just about perfect. So here we are, and here I suspect we'll stay.
That's awesome. And why did you choose to write about the Great Lakes region in this particular, book?
Well, I think when I grew up, we were a family that took road trips west. We were in western Minnesota, sort of where the plains meet the lakes, and my grandparents were all in North Dakota. And so my dad was a teacher, and when we had our very limited, vacation opportunities, it was usually a drive west. Usually during goose hunting season, Dad was a hunter, and we would go back to the grandparents and hunt. Um, but we didn't really go east. And so I knew about Lake Superior because there was an atlas in the car, and so I saw it on maps. I knew it was there, but we just never went that direction. We were habitual westward travelers. Um, just for an example, I remember I grew up on a steady diet of classics illustrated comic books, and one of my favorites was The Song of Hiawatha. which is not the complete poem in the Classics Illustrated version. It is abridged for young readers and illustrated throughout. And I was always entranced by Hiawatha, this great warrior um, who grew up by the shores of Gitche Gumi. And I had no idea that that was Lake Superior. I didn't know that. I didn't know that if we had just once turned the car east and north, that we could have been at Gitche Gumi by lunchtime. I had no idea. Um, and so when I finally made that drive to Duluth in my early 20s, I came for some radio training. I came over the hill and saw what looked like an ocean to me. It looked like an ocean. It was a sea. Didn't look like a lake at all. And out over the water, I remember that very first time I saw it, there were three or four different storm systems kind of moving in different directions, going this way and that. And there was hail happening on the hillside of Duluth. And I just thought, this is a place where the gods are at play. This is a place where everything is happening. I've got to figure out a way to move here someday. It took me many years, but I finally did it. So it was a matter of just being smitten right away and just never getting over it. So when I think of my favorite places, and here's a good writing hack: never set a novel in a place where you haven't been or don't love it. Uh, you're just asking for trouble and failure. But if you write about a place that you worship, then you're going to have good luck.
I so appreciate that. I think that that reverence really shines through in your writing. Um, so you talked a little bit about your relationship with books in your early life, but just let's keep it light for now. What is your relationship for books? And bonus points if you can tell us about a favorite childhood book.
Oh, yeah, that's an easy one. Every reader has that one book that lit the spark for them. And my mom was a teacher, and so I think she was frustrated to have a toddler who wasn't allowed to learn to read until school age. So she just taught me to read when I don't really remember a pre-phonics childhood at all. My earliest memories are of being read to and then very quickly starting to read. Um, but the book that really lit the fire was The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graham. And I can still remember my third grade teacher actually recommended that book. Um, she was a great reader and understood exactly what would light the flame under a child. And I remember I had the version that was sold by what we used to call Arrow Books. It was Scholastic Books, and you would order these books in the classroom, and then you'd wait, a few weeks, and then they would be delivered, and you'd take your books home, and it was wonderful. And she had recommended that, so I got it, and I was unsure about it because it looked like I mean, there was a picture of like some talking animals on the front. There was a rat in the mall, and they were having a picnic. But I thought The Wind in the Willows, I don't know, it might be, I don't know, maybe a little girly, might not be exactly the adventuresome or baseball-oriented book that I was maybe hoping for. Um, and then I started it. And at the beginning of that story, I don't know if you remember it, but it begins with a mole, and he's working in his underground burrow, and something calls to him, and he's not sure what it is. Of course, it's spring. It is spring that is calling to him. And so he's doing his house cleaning, and suddenly he's just compelled to start digging his way up. And he goes to the surface and he pokes his head out into a beautiful meadow, and the sun is shining, and there's a breeze coming through the grasses and blowing the grasses. And he hears the sound, and it's the sound of water. It's the sound of a brook or a river. And before he knows it, he's up in the meadow and he's running toward the river as fast as he can go. And I remember just thinking, oh my, I was just there. I was with Mole, and suddenly you're at the river, and there's the water rat down there with his rowboat, and there's they throw a picnic basket in the rowboat, and they go down, and they say, I don't know, it was just one adventure after another. I couldn't get enough, and I still get excited when I think about stories, especially stories like that, stories that are set in some beautiful piece of nature. Um, I don't know. I feel like that's what I'm here to do is enjoy stories and maybe come up with a few. And so that was the book that lit the flame for me. And I also grew up in a house full of books. My mother was just a determined and obsessed reader at certain points in her life. And when I was a kid, she was leading a group of women in one of these great books reading circles that used to be so popular in the 60s. So she had all these kind of beautiful paperback editions from the great books, whoever was publishing for great books at that time. So she had all these lovely editions of Joyce and Hemingway and Thomas Mann and the rest. Um, and I think that just having those around, even though I was too young to understand any of them, having them around and thinking, oh, this is what big people do, is they read books and then they get together and they discuss books. That was incredibly formative for me. Yeah, for sure.
Well, look at all these people here to discuss this book. And speaking of your love for stories, you yourself worked as a radio reporter and producer for Minnesota Public Radio.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and, and here at Bridge, Michigan, we love our friends in public radio, and our media landscape is so much richer because of our dedicated colleagues. How do you think your experiences in public radio shaped you as a writer?
Oh man. Well, in many ways. First of all, it was the first chance I ever had to work with really good editors. And I can remember, starting with them in my early 20s. Um, the first time I sent a script, I was in Bemidji in northern Minnesota, and I sent a script for a story down to the what we called the mothership in St. Paul, to the editing staff there, and they edited it. And I didn't know how this worked. I was a newbie. And I felt very insulted that they would change my script for my news story. I thought it was perfect because after all, I had written it. Anything that I had written down seemed like a sacred text to me. And so I felt aggrieved and annoyed that I would need editing, that they would think that my stuff wasn't perfect right out of the gate. But of course, I did a terrible job. It was an early draft. And I realized after two or three of those stories that no matter what I sent them, they always improved it. They always asked me to do something that would make it better. And so I stopped taking it like a personal insult and started taking it like a kid in a classroom. It's like, oh, I can become a better writer if I listen to these people. Um, even even the editors there who didn't have much experience, um, even the lower editors were making my stuff so much better. And to this day, I've never written anything that wasn't better after an editor had a go. And sometimes three or four goes to improve it and to poke me where I need to be poked and say, no, what are you doing with all these adjectives? Come on, Anger, you can do better than this. And that's always true. That's always true. So that was a very big deal. But then the other thing I think I really got from working for NPR was that I was kind of shy. I was a reserved person and kind of a classic Scandinavian Midwesterner who didn't want to pick up the phone and call somebody I didn't know and ask for an interview. That was very difficult for me to learn to do. But NPR forced me to go out and to meet people and to understand that everybody has a story to tell and something to say that is worth my hearing. And so I met people I would have just driven past otherwise. I met people that I had no other way of knowing, and that was very much to my benefit. And I really learned a lot about how even the people that you would think might not have something interesting to say, those people especially have something interesting to say. So that was the public radio influence, and I've benefited from it to this day.
I think so. I mean, just being a collector of stories for so long, and I don't know, getting used to working with editors probably helped across several novels.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so now let's talk more about I Cheerfully Refuse. I mean, this is what the people are, clamoring for here. So I just want to say it was an incredible novel. I think it was, I think, when we were chatting earlier, we talked about, it feels a little heavy, but there's so much hope. It's such a beam of light in a dark place, which I think is what
Oh,
we all need
thanks.
more of.
That's nice to hear. Thank you.
So in 30 seconds or less, can you share what I Cheerfully Refuse is about for those listeners who may have not had a chance to read the book yet? I won't
Okay,
count.
30 seconds. Yeah, that's a tall order. Okay. In a very near future, a future where a handful of billionaires own the world and everybody else gets by the best they can. Um, in this grim future lives a happy couple, Rainey and Lark. He's a bass player. She is a renegade bookseller. And life is imperfect, but they make it work. And this couple takes in a traveler. They take in a stranger. And kind of a red-haired, skinny kid off the road, I guess, is how I would describe him. And they should know better. They've read their Robert Louis Stevenson. They understand what happens when you take in a stranger. But they are good people, and Lark, in particular, is a person who does the right thing. She is a good Samaritan. So they let him have the extra room that they have up in the attic. They help the boy, and they inherit, of course, the trouble that is pursuing him. And when the trouble arrives, as you know it will, it's at that point that the story that the sails really fill with wind. And at that point, you just have to find something and hang on.
I think that was a great abbreviated, abridged description. I so appreciate that. I mean, all these characters, they grew and they surprised me, and it was just I was like voraciously waiting for Rainey. I mean, I think he really arrived, when his quest began. He really embodied so many principles. Ultimately, I want to be clear, guys, this talk is going to be filled with spoilers, so I'm not going to dance around it. Like, I can't be vague here. I mean, Rainey's quest really starts when, Lark ultimately she dies. And it was so wonderful watching him like embody her values at each like inflection point in the book. He really stepped up and set like such a good example.
Yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
was a
please.
that was a very uh, you mentioned that Lark passes, and I knew that was going to happen. I understood where the book was going. But it's also true that when I got to that point after several weeks of writing draft, I understood what had to be done, and it just stopped me cold. It stopped me cold for about 4 days, where I tried everything else. I did everything I could because by then I had really fallen for that character. I loved writing about her. I loved writing about both of them, but Lark in particular was easy to write, and every time she arrived on the page, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I felt secure. I felt like I was on solid ground whenever Lark was on the page. So it was a big loss, but it also had to transpire in order for the book to move forward. Um, so uh, the world is messed up, isn't it?
I totally agree. I mean, Rainey and Lark's fabulous romance. It was such a vehicle. It transformed individuals and communities, including Rainey himself. I mean, part of the story is that Lark always believes that people can grow and change. She's so, open to that possibility. She's so like merciful in that way as well. And that included Rainey himself. I mean, you mentioned, wrote in the book, Rainey, he like fell in love with her when he didn't really read. He was illiterate, right?
Yeah.
And together, I mean, in pursuit of her, he just becomes a different person. Otherwise, this was a pretty messed up book. I mean, that was just beautiful, but the rest of it, man, like that was a pretty messed up book and a pretty messed up world.
Yeah,
I'll
that's
say the
that's
book was
that's
great. The
true.
world. I mean, how did you land on the story for this book? Was there a particular scene or moment you pictured that got you inspired to flesh out the rest of the story?
The very first thing that I wrote wasn't it wasn't the first chapter of the book. I imagined a scene in a library where there's a young man who is not there to read. He's just sort of hiding out in the library because it's warm and he needs a place to eat his lunch. Um, and and I imagined someone falling in love with the librarian who he can't actually see. She's out of his view, but he can hear her voice, and her voice is low and calm, and especially it is wise in that she is working at the help desk, the information desk, and she can always recommend to a library patron what they need the most. She has that gift that I've noticed certain librarians have of being able to recommend a book that will cure what ails them. I was thinking of a great Ann Tyler novel called Dinner at the Homesick Restaurant, and the conceit in that book is that there is a place, an imaginary place, where you can go and be served the food that will not only fill your belly, but that will heal you existentially. You go in and you sit down and you don't even have a chance to order. They just bring you what they know you need. Well, that's such a lovely idea. And I don't know if there probably are foods that will do that. Um, but I know there are books that will. I know there are books that have given me just what I needed at just the moment I needed them. And that seems to happen throughout my life. There are books that make up like my personal gospel or my personal scripture that I return to time after time because they give me what I need at that moment. Um, and what I wanted from Lark was I wanted her to be the sort of person that would know what that was. And so that scene in the library where he falls in love with the voice of an invisible librarian, that let me know what was going to happen. I understood it was going to be dysfunctional. Um, when I was first starting to write, I thought I will try to extrapolate out 20 or 30 years. What might we look like if we are a country that makes really bad decisions for the next 20 or 30 years? And of course, by the time it was published, it looked like it was maybe 20 or 30 minutes out. It didn't seem like 20 or 30 years anymore, simply in terms of an economy that is being built for the wealthiest and to the immediate peril of the natural world and of what we call civilization. Um, After the past 6 months, I think there are ways in which this book starts to look like a best case scenario. But the hopeful part is, and this is, I think, really important to this book, um, is that as bleak and nihilistic as the world can get, um, certain things are wired into us. We're going to keep falling in love. We are going to keep building our lives because we have hands. We're given these hands. We're going to build lives with these hands. And neighbors are going to keep walking over to the neighbor's house with a bag of extra tomatoes from the garden. Um, Look, I have a son who makes his living building timber frame cabins and artisan furniture. He does other things. He's been a journalist. He's written novels, but he makes his living by doing artisan woodwork. And a few weeks ago, there was a terrible storm that came through northern Minnesota, and it went through his small acreage, and it took down almost all of his trees. Well, that's also his livelihood. He makes what he makes from forest, his own grove. Um, and it went from looking like a mature forest to looking like a war zone or a no man's land. Everything is just down, everything is broken, everything is turned upside down. Well, just last weekend, so a few days ago, um, Robin and I drove over for another visit, but we were joined by a bunch of people, a bunch of mostly men with chainsaws and tools, and everybody converged on their place, and we went out into the woods and we um, did none of us are loggers, all of us do other things, but we just went to work, and by the end of the day, so much had been cleared and so much work had been done, and the sun was showing in places where it hasn't shown in 40 or 50 years. And we started to notice the new trees coming up and new wildflowers already springing up in the wake of this terrible storm. And everybody just sort of repaired to the yard. And some of us got out, There was a guy with a guitar and a guy with a banjo and a guy with a bass, and some of us made pizza in the outdoor pizza oven, and and it turned into a party. And by the time of sundown, when the sun went down, all of us were still there. We were talking and laughing and singing and drinking beer and having pizza, and we were all friends, and it was like we weren't at the beginning of the day, and at the end of the day we were. And so look, nihilism is right there if you want it, but it's also very possible to deflect nihilism, to refuse, to cheerfully refuse nihilism, um, and to do the work, and to make the friends, and to have some pizza and to have a good time while you're doing it. So that's what I wanted to do with this book, was refuse the nihilistic impulse that wants to throw up his hands and say, "Oh well, nothing we can do." There's always something we can do.
That community just picture you just described, I mean, this so closely resembles, I think, the town of Jolie that you wrote in Ontario, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
you wrote a place, I mean, that just so starkly contrasts other towns that Rainey stops in. They seemed a rare people not waging war of one kind or another. I mean,
yeah,
in that place, people are trading in favors. There's a sense of mutual aid. There was even a head nod to like urban farmers, right? And
yeah,
and
yeah.
and all this like kindness and appreciation for music, it supplements currency. These people are not weighed down in the same way. There seems
Yeah.
to be a willingness that people turn towards each other and welcome strangers, which is not normal in this dystopian world you've written. I mean, tell us more about this community that runs counter to Rainey's expectations for how every place is nowadays.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I always tend to write what I badly need myself. Um, it's I guess it's what I've done instead of go to a therapist all these years is try to write a scenario that feels possible and that feels maybe even likely. And I've noticed that, like, since COVID, um, when COVID, I actually started this book the day we went into lockdown. So it was like middle of March of 2020, like the 17th, something like that. I should look back in my journal and see what the date was. But I had been making notes for this sort of dystopian story for a year and a half or 2 years, and then COVID struck, and we were told we're going to be in lockdown the day after tomorrow. And Robin, who always understands exactly what I need, said, I think you should start your book on the day we go into lockdown. I think you should just begin. You've been making notes for a long time. You're ready to go. And I saw the sense of that, and it seemed like a good idea. So every day during lockdown, you remember how quiet it got. It got so incredibly still. Even the weather seemed to just sort of draw back and become still. And so every day we'd go for a couple long walks, and then in between we would come back, and Robin would go upstairs to her quilting attic and make quilts, and I would come here to my office and write 5 or 6 pages of draft. And what we noticed on our walks was that certain things were happening. People used that time to plant, like, a lot of pollinator gardens. That became a very popular thing. Um, and so neighbors that we didn't know were out there with their masks on, planting what looked like weeds, just these tall pollinators that take the sun and make nutrients out of it. And so when June arrived and May arrived, you'd see all these bees, and the pollinator gardens just took immediate effect. Uh, and so sometimes you stop because somebody's out there doing something in their yard and it's interesting. So you stop and you say hi. And maybe that doesn't lead to close friendship. Maybe sometimes it does. Most of the time it doesn't. But what it does is it does give you a sense of who your neighbors are that you maybe didn't know before. And that was lovely. And that's a kind of pollination too, isn't it? And so I think there was a kind of contagion of um, decency and of kindness and of um, constructive effort that countered the contagion of COVID. And that was very inspiring to me, and that helped me to come up with the town of Jolie. Um, I do think that in times that are difficult, um, in times of sickness or political dysfunction, that there is that people tend to lean on each other in ways they didn't always expect to have to. I know that I know my neighbors better than I did before COVID, and I like them better because I know them better, and people tend to be likable. Um, if you spend 6 or 7 minutes listening to people, there's always something there to admire. There's always something there to like. So we are, the dominant narrative right now is that um, Americans all hate each other. But in my lived experience, that doesn't seem to be true. I think that there's an awful lot of native kindness still in people and still in force in our cities and towns.
I would really love to follow this through line that it's like a notion that joy is an expression of resistance against despair and nihilism. There's so many examples of, joy as a tool in this book. I mean, Lark is prescriptively handing out books. Rainey's music keeps people's spirits alive during like his prison stint. Um,
Right.
Marcel's kindness is a tool to organize people ultimately in this
Yeah.
rebellion. And the 12, I mean, that like really powerful scene where I mean miraculously they've survived, and I mean it's just a slap in the face to their jailers and captors when they're stretching and they're like laughing. Their joy is literally it's an affront to their captors, but it does something else. It ignites everybody else on the boat, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
It does.
I would love you to like talk more about that notion, right? Like you've talked about joy as like a way to bring people together, but in this book, I mean, it ended up being like almost the climax. Like this one expression of joy ended up fomenting a climax in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, the great thing about joy is that it tends to be really contagious. It's quite catching. And I think it's also a paradox because look, I think that joy is connected quite closely to acceptance, by which I mean the willingness to look at a situation and see it for what it is. If if a situation is bad, um, I think a person becomes available to joy by looking at it and saying, "This is bad. This is a bad thing." Because I think what that does is maybe it unlocks imagination. Um, I think if you can look at something straight on and see it for what it is, that frees your imagination to roam. And if you have a roaming imagination, and the world is a spacious place, there's room here to think about other ways of doing things. If you have a roaming imagination, then you're going to come up with something maybe better than this terrible fact that you're living with. And so that accessibility to imagination, um, I don't know. I think joy is a natural byproduct of that. I think if you can imagine something bigger, something better, if you can imagine something calmer, or something more healing, or more generous, then joy is going to it's going to flow out of your fingertips. There were times when I was working on this manuscript, and you mentioned that scene with the 12 where they survived the terrible storm out on the raft. There were times when I felt like joy was coming out of my fingertips onto the keyboard. It felt like something quite magical, and it also felt very tactile and real. And so that was a lovely writing experience, and it was also one of the only things I didn't have to mess with. I didn't have to change. And I mean, once in a while, you have one of those good days where what you write as a first draft is actually is what remains, and it lives through the edits. And that was one of those scenes. So I think the acceptance of reality uh, allows the imagination freedom to roam, and that is a producer of joy. And joy is sometimes elusive, but when it is there, it's quite contagious. And I really found that when I was touring around for this book, it seemed like I would go to bookstores and people came out. Most people had already read it by the time I got there. That was a new experience for me. Um, they read it and they were there because they wanted to talk about it. They wanted to talk about their own experience of joy during COVID or their interaction with their neighbors. I mean, it struck a chord in a way I just didn't see coming. I didn't. You never know quite how your book is going to be received, and you hope that it goes out and it makes friends. And that's what happened with this one. It was quite lovely and felt very contagious. Um, I came back really rejuvenated from my travels.
So appreciate that. What you said earlier about, how imagination and joy are connected. It makes so much sense that you would craft a world where so many people are disconnected from that ability to imagine because I mean, Lark's a renegade bookseller. It doesn't seem like a lot of people are doing this these days, right? I mean, people's worlds are so closed off. It's so hard to imagine something better and it's so easy to fall into that despair when you're cut off from, information and imagination.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. You know, I said earlier that I tend to write what I need.
Mhm.
And what I needed, because of COVID, because of, any number of sort of American policies and foibles, because of this generalized mood, I really needed a story that would offer me something something tangible to hold on to. And so everything I love went into the story and made it what it became. So an appreciation of music. Wow, so often if I'm just feeling bummed out, um, if I turn on a piece of music, if I turn on One Fine Day, not the old version from the 60s, but the David Byrne composition, One Fine Day, or Something Good Coming by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, or anything by the Traveling Wilburys, uh, my day is transformed. My day is transformed. I start every writing day listening to two or three songs and then turning them off because if I try to write to music, I can't do it. I'm too distracted by the glory of the melody. Um, Music went into it. Books, obviously. I mean, the books that have picked me up over the years sort of made appearances here in this story. I reread a few translations of the Orpheus mythology because I wanted Orpheus very much in my head when Rainey is the musician entering his own underworld. Um, one of my favorite parts of the Old Testament are those conversations between David and Saul, when Saul is a mad king, kind of losing his mind, and calls for the shepherd boy to calm him down by playing a musical instrument. And I wanted to tap into some of the power inherent in that story when Rainey is on the ship and summoned by Warwick to play music. I found that to be really a powerful thing to tap into. The natural world, Lake Superior, which has always seemed to me like, um, look, when I was a boy and I grew up near Lake Osagus, I had access to my brother's old sailboat, which was a little like a 12-foot scow design of a sailboat. Um, and and I learned something really important about nature and about myself. Because when I was in junior high and high school, I had debilitating migraine headaches pretty regularly. I'd get up in the morning and think, "Oh, I'm in trouble today." And if these headaches landed, which they often did, I would be just debilitated for 2, sometimes 3 days at a go. And one time, after I had learned to sail, I woke up on a Saturday morning. I had an unbelievably terrible headache, and I thought, I'm going to drag myself out. I'd been looking forward to sailing all week. I pulled the boat out and I went sailing with this headache pounding. And in an hour, I forgot that I had ever had that headache. It was gone. It was just vanished. Everything that was weighing on me fell off because I was into the wind and the waves, and riding atop the waves on this glorious little quiet boat. Um, and that worked every time. If it's summertime, I never get a headache because I go down to the water. And I don't, at this point, I don't even really need to be on the water. I can just be near it, and the headache will vanish. Um, I learned that the natural world has the power to remove our temporal worries. Um, and so I wanted to pour some of that into this book as well. Um, so I mean, everything that I love, everything that I need, um, just I pour that into my books because I don't know what else to do. And so far it has done me a lot of good.
I love that. I've learned the phrase "good medicine," right? Like a good breeze
Yeah.
is good medicine, laughter
Yeah.
is good medicine, time spent in nature, good medicine. So it's,
Yes.
and you say it clears your migraine, so good medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I'll ask a couple more questions here, and then I'll turn it over to some of the audience questions we received. So, for readers who are inspired to nurture communities that care for each other in spite of a backdrop of mistrust, despair, what advice do you hope they take away from this book if they're inspired to nurture these communities?
Oh, look, I think get to know the people that are in your purview, you know. It's so easy to have neighbors that you don't know, and I don't know most of mine here in this little neighborhood in Duluth where I live. I know more of them than I did a few years ago when we moved here, and I'm gradually getting to know them. But I would say if there's somebody that lives next door, or down your street, um, say hi next time you walk past and they're in their yard. Say hello, introduce yourself. Um, you know, don't try and sell them anything. Just say hi. Just find out what makes them tick. Something always does. That's the biggest thing. And then sometimes that turns into something. I'm starting a local book club with a couple of friends, uh, and actually one guy that I haven't even met yet. We're going to meet and talk about George Saunders's book Civil War Land in Bad Decline in a couple of weeks. I can't wait. Um, I think that's going to be really fun. A lot of men aren't in book clubs. It seems to be something that is dominated by women, and I've been so envious of my wife and her lovely book club. But I can't go to that. That's her book club. I'm not invited. Um, and I was sharing that frustration with a friend of mine whose significant other is in my wife's book club. And he said, let's start our own. He said, I'm frustrated too. Let's start our own. So we're doing it. That's something. Have people over for soup in your backyard. Um, it's just about making some connections, and it's easier. I mean, look, I'm kind of an introvert. I don't sound like one right now. I sound like an extrovert. I'm really not. It's not easy for me to do. I am, after all, Scandinavian and Midwestern. Um, and so those things are not automatic for me. But life is better if you know some folks, and you'll find out what your points of connection are after 5 minutes. That's my best
Yeah,
advice. Get to know people.
it's so important to create the kinds of communities you want to be a part of. If you see there's a void, I mean, it could be you who creates that community. I think that's
Yeah,
just such
right.
such powerful and also simple, but not easy advice.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Easier said than done. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Last question on my end before I turn it over to the audience questions. Can you describe a memorable interaction that you've had with a reader about this book? Are there any that stick out to you? Any stories that people have shared in response?
Oh, yeah. There was I have a reader who is a woman in a, she's in the book business, has been for a long time. And so I've run into her at a number of bookish events, and she's just absolutely a lovely reader. You want somebody like her to read your book. And my book came out, and I knew she had a copy. And yet I didn't hear from her, and I kind of count on her. I always count on her for an early response. And a couple of months went by, and finally she reached out. She sent me an email, and she said, I have to admit that I've only just now read it. She said, I was so dreading it because I understood it was dystopian, and I'm so affected by dystopian novels that I just was afraid it would put me in a dark place. And I thought, oh no. uh, but then she said, but I finally realized that I needed to read it, and I did. And instead of being in a dark place, I feel more hopeful than I did before I started it. And that made me so happy. It made me feel exactly like the book had found its proper place. It had found its audience. And you really can't hope for anything more than that. Um, I, I hope that that's the response a lot of people have. And I've gotten a lot of mail just over the transom, letters from people who somehow found out where I live, and send me letters saying this book made me feel more optimistic. I'm really glad. I hope that it does. It did that for me when I was working on it. Um, and so that was a very memorable interaction. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I'm a person who typically I'm a little skeptical of novels that are framed as dystopian, and I read this and I said, "What are people talking about?"
Yeah,
Because
right.
it's
Yeah.
dystopian in the way you built the world, but it is a story of hope. It's bright, and I resist that truly. Okay, let me turn it over to some audience questions while we still have time. We had a reader, Terry. He noted that the dystopia that you've created here is not very welcoming to strangers, and that really parallels, especially an inflection point we're in right now with like fear of immigrants, fear of the other. Were you writing with these types of real situations in mind? I
Oh,
imagine.
yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, the book is more than anything else I've written. This book is a response to the age we live in. Um, it just doesn't, fear just never pays off. It never leads to something good. Um, and given the immigrant past that almost all of us have, it feels really counterproductive to be so frightened and angry. Um, I saw a viral clip a while ago of some person who was saying, nothing makes me happier than seeing video of ICE agents confronting immigrants um, after their day at immigration court. And I thought, wow,
Nothing makes them happier.
nothing makes them happier than that. That's an empty life right there. If that's your source of joy, that's really empty. And I just don't think most people are that mean. I mean, there's a lot of mean people right now, and there's a lot of mean people setting our policy. Um, but I don't think that describes most of us. I just don't. There again, that's the dominant narrative. And if you're a fan of social media, it's easy to buy into. But my experience is I'm 64. I've met a lot of people. Most of them, that's not their default setting. And I think that we can remember our default and enact our default. I don't think that that's a hopeless cause at all. I think kindness and understanding and empathy um, is not a weakness. I think it's a strength, and we can return to it. Many of us all, have.
Really agree. Thank you for sharing that. One reader, Elaine, she noted that the characters drive this original and very hopeful novel. Can you share anything about your process for developing some of the characters that drive the story? I'm thinking of like Rainey, Lark, Soul, or Warwick. I mean, they were just such standouts.
Oh, yeah. Whenever I knew that, for example, Soul, you mentioned Soul. She appears almost at the geographic center of this book. Um, 100, I don't know, 180 pages in or something, she shows up. And I understood that there was going to be a child. A child was necessary for this book to feel whole. It's a book about the future, and children have always been so central to any idea of a positive future. And so there had to be a child. I didn't know what she was going to be like. Boy or girl, I had no idea. And so, as that point in the book, I understood that person was going to appear once Rainey is blown by a storm across Lake Superior and ends up on the Michigan shore. I knew that that's where it would happen. And so, in the days leading up to that, I started kind of auditioning characters in my morning pages. I have this habit of getting up and just writing pages in a journal every day. Um, and I use that as a place to um, try out characters and see if they have a voice. Um, and so this girl Soul, um, I just basically interviewed her and asked this fictional character some questions and let her find her voice, let her get her feet under her. And that has been a very useful tactic for uncovering characters that actually have something to say and have a background and have a history. Ideally, when I'm reading a book, what I love best is when there are supporting characters who feel like they have a life off the page, like they have they're just discovering you in a way, and but they have a whole story to tell. And if you ask the right questions, they'll release that story and they'll give it to you. Um, if I am writing a character then and they don't have a backstory that they can just tell me as if we were sitting on somebody's porch, then I let go of them. I want them to have a big story to tell and one that's just their own. And she just yielded this story. She had, you know, uncertain parentage, uncertain provenance. She had an uncle that might not be an uncle. Um, she had a whole story to tell, and most of it didn't end up in the book. Um, but that told me that I was onto the right character. You know, most of them. That's the process I have.
Love that. Thank you. I just love the introduction of Soul. She had such an old way of her, like it's like as if she were part of an old world. I recall that scene where she felt really strongly about giving a person a proper burial, and it was like, we don't care about that stuff anymore. What do you mean? You're 9. And I
Yeah.
was like, whoa, this kid's been here before. Like she's done this before
Yeah, and
somewhere,
she's so
somewhere.
courageous, you know.
Sure.
It was really fun to write because kids, man, a lot of kids are really brave. That's something I see all the time. And if I'm around like my grandchildren, you see, oh my gosh, these kids are they're so brave in surprising circumstances. And the thing that scares her the most is actually uh, writing. Uh, the world of letters frightens her. Um, and that too says something about that world that may or may not be in front of us is uh, it's an illiterate world. And so when she sees writing on a page, she sees it as a kind of witchcraft and something not to be trusted. And so for me, one of the biggest events in the story was when Rainey, who's on the medicine ship, essentially the slave ship at that point, gets a note from Soul, and she has just written her name. She's written her name, SOL, like he taught her to do. And she's done that. And that's the first time she has actually written something. And because of her resistance to language and resistance to writing, that was a very big moment. And when it happened, I was just completely taken aback and delighted and surprised.
Love that. Um, she's just such a great character. I could go on and on about Soul, but I won't. I will get on to Rondi's question. Are you a bass player? It is an interesting choice. Did you choose a guitar because it's more versatile?
Yeah, I did play bass for many years. I'm not a good bass player like Rainey is. I think Rainey has a good intuitive sense for the instrument. Um, I actually played in my brother-in-law's church band. He was a pastor until he retired a few years back. Um, and when he and my sister moved to a nearby community to take a church, he asked if I would come and play on Sunday mornings, play bass. He said, "I need a bass player." So I said, I'll learn bass if you'll teach me." And that was nice because I got to learn a new instrument. I got to understand how a bass, in some ways, builds a foundation for a song to live on. and then, the keyboards come along on top of that and build the walls, and your singers kind of put the roof on, and you have a pianist, and you have a guitar player, you have an electric lead. But all that is what's really visible. That's the visible part of the house. But the foundation that no one really understands or knows about or can really hear, that's the bass line. And so I wanted Rainey to set a baseline for the story, and I wanted him to be intuitive, and to be able to sort of guide a song in the way that it needs to go. So I think without that experience, I would have had to choose something else. But I liked that it was a bass, because a bass is not, a bass is something that is kind of inaudible to most people. You don't, unless you're listening for it, you don't recognize a bass line. Um, and if you're playing in front of people, it's a very comforting thing, because if you mess up, most people aren't going to say, "Oh, that bassist hit a wrong note." What they're going to do is they're going to experience a disturbance in the force, um, but they won't know where it comes from or that it's your fault. So it's a very forgiving instrument, um, and it was enormously fun to give him that particular talent, and to see how it played out thematically through the story.
Oh, I love that. I'm so happy to hear you've woven so much of yourself into here. The next question I think will be similar in spirit. This will be our last question before I begin to wrap us up, guys, at one. So Joel asked, well, he noted first, he said, I like to read a novel like yours with a map handy. Have you sailed to the Slates or some other identifiable locations in the novel?
I've sailed a lot on Lake Superior, but I've never sailed to the Slate Islands. I felt a little guilty to write so much about them without having been there myself. Um, but it's a very remote location, and I never had the courage to sail across that wild and stormy lake, all the way to the Slates. I tended to sail in the safer parts, the parts with good anchorages, the Apostle Islands, the North Shore up as far as Grand Marais, but I never got to the Slates. On the other hand, here's what I tell myself about that. Um, I wrote the Slates as a place where anything might happen, a place where you might see the ghost of your beloved, a place where you might see any kind of ghost, or you might see a caribou coming down to the shore to drink, as they quite famously do in the Slate Islands. Um, I think it's possible that if I had been there, I would have felt constrained by what I knew. I might have felt that I needed to keep it, shoreline accurate. And instead, I was able to write it the way that you can comfortably write a place that you only love and have never been to. I think in some ways that freed me up to make it a very magical place. So that's my defense. Maybe it's horse pucky, but that's the way I felt about it.
I love it. We're going to end on that note with our discussion. Thank you all. As promised, we are wrapping up at 1 p.m. I want to just say thank you so much, Leif, for your time, your attention. You are so intentional, and it was just such a refreshing, conversation to have. Someone who believes in the power of hope and community, to see us through dark times.
Well,
Um,
thank you so much for having me. It was a genuine pleasure, and keep doing the good work.
Yeah, we'll be posting this recording to Bridge, Michigan this week. So do please keep an eye out. Send it to your friends. Rewatch it if you missed anything. And this recording will also show up on our events page on our new app. Culture Club events are held every other month, and we'll have our next one in October 2025. So please do keep your eyes on your inbox for a post-event survey. We'll ask you for suggestions for future selections. And a reminder, if you'd like to be eligible to receive our next Culture Club selection, consider becoming a Bridge Club member today. Thank you all again and have a wonderful day, okay?
Thanks a lot.
Bye, guys.